Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman. And if you're one of the 25 to 45 million Americans living with IBS, or if you're living in any other country and you're still suffering with the symptoms of IBS or SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which include all kinds of digestive issues and discomfort, then this week's episode is for you. I'm going to be talking to Phoebe Lapine, who is the author of SIBO Made Simple, which is really a must-read, not just for people suffering from unwanted GI symptoms, but for anyone looking to improve their gut health without sacrificing delicious food. And this week's episode is brought to you by the After Sugar Club, which is where you'll get the step-by-step guidance you need from me to help you let go of sugar and the emotional hold it has on you so that you can get to a place of freedom where you don't even need, want, or miss it anymore, so that you can break free from sugar for good and make your intermittent fasting lifestyle easy and natural. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the green button, join the club. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that it appears magically in your podcast player every Sunday. And if you've listened to several episodes before and you haven't yet left a review, could I ask you to scroll down, please, and rate the podcast and leave a lovely review to tell me how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. Has it inspired you to reduce sugar? Has it made you think about sugar a little bit differently? I love reading your reviews. Thank you. And if you're an intermittent faster, then I have 5 tips for you to help you get rid of cravings that may be getting in the way of you living your easy and natural intermittent fasting lifestyle. Go to aftersugarclub.com and download my 5 tips there. Now let's get to my chat with Phoebe. All right, so I'm talking with Phoebe Lapine. Is that how you say your name?
It's Lapine, but you can say Lapine. Many people do.
All right. I'm getting all Frenchified on you because it sounds like a French name.
I know. I mean, it might very well be. We don't really know.
Okay. All right. And so, Phoebe, can you tell us a little bit about what life was like for you when you were still eating all the foods?
Yes. So that was way back in 2014, 2015, or maybe 2013, 2014. I can't even remember my own timeline anymore. It's been a while. So I, was an omnivore. I was working as a food professional. I quit my corporate job after starting a food blog to kind of pursue doing something in the culinary world full time. I wasn't quite sure what that was. I was basically just taking a lot of odd food jobs to make ends meet. And, it being my profession, I was always, very passionate about being an omnivore. But my health was also at the very same time taking a real, downward spiral. A few years before, I'd gotten diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is, an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid gland. And I wasn't really explained by my childhood doctor what that was. I didn't even know what a thyroid was, let alone an autoimmune disease. And so I kind of didn't really connect a lot of the symptoms that I was feeling with, perhaps, that disease running amok. But I was, completely broken out in this horrible skin rash, which was ultimately the symptom that kind of got me to pay attention. But more so than that, I was just incredibly fatigued all the time. I was losing a lot of weight, but like not in a good way. I kind of would eat whatever I wanted, but would see, the contents of my plate in the toilet afterwards. So clearly, now in hindsight, I wasn't really absorbing any nutrients. And, even though I was tired all the time, I had trouble sleeping. I was, would wake up at 4 a.m. in like a cold sweat and have my mind racing, a lot of anxiety. And I had to kind of stop exercising because I would get horrible cramps every time I tried to run, which was my preferred mode of exercise. So eventually all these things kind of added up, and I went and saw a doctor with a little bit more of a holistic perspective, and he told me to do an elimination diet. And so like gluten was the first thing I really took out of my life. But then, it kind of became this, big aha moment for me once I realized how much better I felt. And I ended up kind of designing a year-long journey of my own, that I wrote about in my last book called The Wellness Project, just about slowly making over my life kind of one change at a time, in order to, just get back on track and overcome my Hashimoto's. And the first change that I made was I gave up sugar, caffeine, and alcohol for just a month, but really staunchly. I guess I didn't do, I still ate whole fruit. It was really just added sugar, including all of the natural ones. So maple syrup, honey, nope, nope, nope. Would have some fruit smoothies in the morning, but really just was trying to focus on non-sugar options. And it was pretty crazy because even after I made the change, getting gluten out of my diet and doing that elimination diet, I still had this rash on my face that would kind of crop up, maybe once a year, but I'd really had it for almost a decade. It's something called perioral dermatitis, which some people listening might identify with or have been diagnosed with. But it's really like an unfortunate one because it's around the nose and mouth, and it's just this red pixelated rash. You can't quite, it's very different than like acne or pimple. It's really hard to like cover up with foundation, and it's an inflammatory thing. So, covering up your face all the time isn't really great. And I'd been to many dermatologists and got put on, round upon round of antibiotics, been given like steroid creams and, the whole 9 yards. And they would work, for a few months or so. But kind of why I arrived at my wellness project was because they stopped working altogether and really like nothing was helping. I'd go on the antibiotics and they'd help for a few weeks and then it'd be back. So this was really me taking matters into my own hands and kind of on the suggestion of more of a holistic practitioner, just kind of giving my liver a little reset, which is why I chose the sugar, caffeine, and alcohol. And it was pretty crazy. I mean, 2 weeks in, I took actually a daily photo, so I have the evidence, but 2 weeks in, the rash had like really started to go away. It was still there, but it was almost like kind of like a shadow of its former self. And by the end of the month, like it was gone. And the craziest part is even though I went back to eating some sugar, it never came back.
Really?
Literally. Yeah, it
Wow.
never came back after 10 years of chronic issues. So, I mean, obviously sugar, I wouldn't say sugar on its own was the culprit. I just think my liver had gotten totally out of whack. My gut was totally out of whack from all of the antibiotics, but, just giving it that profound reset really helped.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. Because it took what you call a holistic practitioner. Is that the term for it?
Yeah, I was someone who I did not continue a relationship with. I didn't end up trusting her at the end of the day, but that was the one helpful suggestion she gave me. It's just like my liver was in disarray. So I was like, okay, I did some research. I'm like, what are the things I can do to help my liver? And I was very much, of the mind kind of going into my project that I wanted it to be, not about like specific supplements or doodads and really just like kind of the common sense things we need to do. And when our liver, by the way, has, 100 different jobs. And unfortunately, in today's modern era, it spends a lot more time than it used to just dealing with all the sugar coming into our bodies and, converting it from energy into fat and vice versa,
Yeah.
which is why we have, an epidemic of diabetes and what, you don't need me to preach to this audience.
Oh, you can preach all you like. So really what it took, I guess, is just another approach than medications and antibiotics to think about, well, maybe there's something else that would get to the root cause of your rash.
Yes. And, my dermatologist who, oh gosh, I do not see her anymore either. But, she did say, she was like, yeah, I mean, clearly there's something wrong in the body, but we don't know what it is. And they just had no interest in helping me find it. So it's not like they thought that, the long-term cure was necessarily antibiotics. It was just like only thing they had in their Rolodex.
Mm-hmm. Was that frustrating for you as a patient?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But there are so many inflammatory issues, autoimmune disease included, that, stems from some sort of, disarray in the body that we haven't quite identified. So, there's just a lot in science, that needs to catch up anyway. And then of course, once that catch up happens, it takes a little while longer to trickle down to practitioners, unless, you're someone who's kind of doing your own experimentation within your population.
And when you cut the sugar and the caffeine, and what was the other thing that you cut?
Alcohol.
And the alcohol.
Yeah. I'll say I was 25 at the time. So.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
It was.
Yeah. And so what kind of reaction did you get from, your family, your friends, people? I mean, that's a visible thing to be changing.
Absolutely. And I would say, given my age, it was, the most uncomfortable in social situations, mainly the alcohol, but I actually found the alcohol the easiest of all of them to abstain from. And then caffeine kind of the second easiest, once I kind of got over the hump. But then the sugar, I'd cut out caffeine a few times in my life. So, I knew what that quote unquote withdrawal was like, but the sugar withdrawal, because it had to have been the sugar, I mean, it persisted for 2 weeks. I would just be fatigued, and it was very dramatic. And I wouldn't say that I was someone who ate like a crazy amount of sugar, what I would have thought was a crazy amount of sugar to begin with. It was more, the kind of unconscious things like eating, a packaged bar every day for breakfast, or when I was on the move, I was working as a chef and a caterer. So like, I wasn't honestly eating 3 balanced meals a day. Like I was often really resorting to snacks on the go because I was cooking food for other people and just kind of getting my sustenance in when I could. And then of course, there's so much sugar involved in drinking. So I thought it was, the perfect little trio to do together because, each one of those vices, I called it the vice detox. Each one of those vices kind of feed each other. If you're up late drinking, the next morning, you're going to crave caffeine. If you're having sugar for breakfast, you're going to maybe crave even more caffeine later in the day. And, if you're drinking a sugary drink at night, like that's just going to set your blood sugar off for the next day too. It's just a little bit of a vicious cycle. So, the hardest part I think was trying to find moderation afterwards. But after 2 weeks, I really kind of got into the groove of what I was doing with the Vice Detox.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes. It's sort of like a bit of a boot camp for a lot of people. And then, funnily enough, once you get through people have different types of detox symptoms. Some have none. Some, like me, it just lasted a couple of days, and some, like for you, a couple of weeks. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not actually that long to be. But you're already fatigued. Did you think, hang on, I'm cutting out all these things and I'm feeling even worse?
I mean, for a little while, yes, but I think I was more amazed by the energy I felt without caffeine and sugar once I kind of acclimated. And I still, I don't drink a ton of caffeine anymore because of that. I mean, I really feel myself when I get onto the roller coaster of coffee or caffeinated beverages, like I just lose that, I don't know, that innate energy in some ways. Yes. I really do feel my dependence.
Okay. So you know how you feel and you act, accordingly.
Yes. And I wouldn't say, I know some people, and I'll just say as a sidebar, I now have kind of an online course where I coach people through some of these changes. And we do the Vice detox for 1 week up front is the first thing we do. It's only those 3 changes because I really do feel it's profound. And so I've heard from a lot of people, who have had various withdrawal symptoms and also just who had different relationships with sugar. And I wasn't ever someone personally who reached to sugar for energy. I reached to caffeine for that. But a lot of people do are, when they're first making the change are confused, like, how am I going to get energy if I can't reach for sugar when I'm crashing in the afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I was the exact same. It's understandable. And the irony is, when we sort of go a little bit deeper about how human biology works, is that you can get your energy, better energy and more stable energy from other sources. So where did you get your energy from when you cut out sugar and caffeine?
I mean, just like real food. I think, now smoothies aren't the first thing I reach to, but then it was like a really great transitional crutch for me. It was easy to make in the morning. It was whole fruit. It was still sweet. So I wasn't, fully going cold turkey and not able to have, that sort of being satiated in that way. So yeah, that was kind of my first step. And then I don't really remember, I guess, because again, I never reached for sugar. I think I just kind of had my energy from not being dependent on caffeine and just eating normally otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. I just want to take a quick break to introduce you to my partner for this podcast, Medicine with Heart, which is an international functional medicine clinic specializing in difficult chronic cases of hormone imbalance, Lyme disease, mold illness, and digestive dysfunction. You can sign up for a consultation with their team to see if they can help reverse your disease. Find out more about them at medicinewithheart.com. So then you were talking about having SIBO.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a bit more about that for you?
Yeah. So after the wellness project was done, all of the changes I made really did add up and changed my life in a very profound way. And then kind of the years afterwards, I wrote the book and it came out and I was feeling great, but launching a book is very stressful and I was doing a lot of traveling and perhaps off of my normal routine. And then I kind of started to notice a few strange gut symptoms creeping back into my life, and not just the normal IBS that I've experienced before, but I was burping a lot in the middle of meals, which was strange. And then the bloating just never went away. It didn't really matter, what I was eating. It just kind of stuck to me like a tire. And so eventually I went back to my doctor and I got a full workup, and he's the one who suggested a SIBO test. And for those who don't know, SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And, it was positive. And so that kind of launched me into a wellness project 2.0 to try and figure out how to heal. And luckily, I had a practitioner who is fairly savvy and, obviously knew to test me in the first place because it's not the most well-known condition. But essentially it was funny. It was a lot of the things that I was doing that I had researched in the wellness project for gut health was actually making my overgrowth worse. And so that's something that I like to spread awareness of, because even though, microbiome science is very much more in the mainstream, it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. That's kind of a best case scenario, eat these fibers and prebiotics and probiotics for your gut. But a lot of us guts are too damaged or have some sort of acute issue like SIBO, upon which eating those things could actually aggravate it and make it worse. So SIBO is kind of an issue of location, not type. Although, it's not good versus bad bacteria, though often the types of bacteria that, begin the overgrowth and contribute to SIBO are the pathogenic kinds. But essentially, you're really not supposed to have very many bacteria in your small intestine because it's where we absorb our food and, quote unquote, eat our nutrients. The large intestine is kind of like the garbage disposal, trying to reap the last few bits of the detritus before we eliminate it. And that is where, our microbiome, our quote unquote good bacteria play a huge role in assisting during the last part of the digestive process. But when they're in the small intestine and they're eating our food, they produce gas. And when it's so far up our intestinal canal, that can cause a lot of really uncomfortable symptoms. The bloating that I mentioned that doesn't go away, trying to get rid of gas wherever possible, hence the burping. But then also just, really a lot of discomfort. A lot of distension and just abdominal pain as a result. And then, it of course creates, some internal problems like leaky gut and a host of other issues. So that was, it was a whole journey trying to deal with that. And, bacteria is very reactive to sugar. It unfortunately feeds the kinds that we don't necessarily want to proliferate. So definitely, tamping down on my sugar consumption again during that healing period was really important.
So what kind of sugar were you cutting out that you hadn't already cut out?
Well, I returned to sugar in moderation. I didn't really keep any sort of refined sugar in the house, but I definitely used maple syrup and honey a little bit. I wasn't, doing a huge amount of baking, but if I was, I'd, use those things. I wasn't eating a huge amount of breakfast bars anymore, but when I did, I tried to choose ones with a much higher degree of fiber and whatnot. But yeah, for the bacteria, it's not necessarily, about the refined versus the natural per se. It's just sugar. So they're going to enjoy, that fast energy the same way we do in some ways. So yeah, I think for my kind of treatment phase, I tried to cut out almost all sugar. And I will say, even though I returned to moderation, like the Vice detox is something that I do several times a year. I do it for just a week whenever I'm feeling, like I'm getting sick or, just run down and I need a reboot. It's kind of my like quick little detox. So yeah, I'm no stranger to kind of just pulling it back, I would say.
And when you do pull it back, and you do the detox for again, that's sugar, caffeine, and alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does it make you feel? How much better does it make you feel?
Yeah, I really do see a huge difference in my skin right away. Even if I'm not broken out or whatnot, just, the kind of the quality, the glow, the resonance, like it really does change. And yeah, besides that, just my energy returns. And yeah, I just start waking up. I start sleeping better and then I start waking up easier and feeling energized like from the get-go of the day.
And can I ask you, I know it's not done in polite conversation, but there's no taboos here. Can I ask you, when you go to the bathroom, how are things when you're in the detox phase, as it were, compared to when you've got SIBO, like full force?
Oh yeah. Well, full force SIBO, gosh, nightmare. And I will say that it took me a while after SIBO treatment, after successfully eradicating it, to have, normal bowel, quote unquote, normal or exceptional bowel movements. There's a whole period of kind of gut healing that needs to happen after you get rid of the overgrowth, because again, I mentioned before, like it causes so much damage. So that was kind of a really slow, long process. I would say it took me a full year to kind of get back to like a really good place. And yeah, with sugar, I haven't noticed as much with my digestion. Certainly like the caffeine and the alcohol, I think make a huge difference. I don't think alcohol does any favors for my digestion ever.
What about fiber? Because I've got a little bit of a thing with fiber, I don't know if you know that I was chronically constipated for like 15 years, and fiber was the worst thing and made things worse, actually. So, and I realized that it's not the same for everyone, but do you eat more fiber, or do you eat different types of fiber or less fiber?
Yeah. So that's, a big thing with the SIBO community, because it's essentially kind of, again, the opposite of what most microbiome scientists tell you to eat for quote unquote good gut health. And that's because, you don't want to feed the bacteria, good or bad, when they're in the wrong place. So it's not necessarily, I mean, it's part kind of like a starvation technique, but more so it's really just trying to focus on the foods that don't leave you as symptomatic. And, there are a lot of doctors who specialize in SIBO talk about the fact that, yes, like even though when we're taking out a lot of these really healthy, good ingredients and types of fiber, we may not be feeding the bacteria in our large intestine that need it. But if we're experiencing so much inflammation from trying to digest these things that we're not capable of, that's just not going to have a good halo effect on the whole system. So it's, just about slowly kind of healing and getting our gut back into a better place to where we can handle those types of fibers. So, it was really hard for me kind of doing the initial SIBO diet to find a happy medium, because I love vegetables. I cook with vegetables so much. And so much of what I've learned about blood sugar is that we need the fiber, in order to prevent, our liver from going into overdrive, trying to deal with sugar, natural or otherwise. And that goes for refined carbohydrates too, not just, quote unquote, normal types of sugar. So the main diet for SIBO is kind of a low FODMAP diet, which is an acronym for different types of carbohydrates. And again, includes so many healthy vegetables, includes garlic and onion and Brussels sprouts, artichokes, leeks, a lot of different things. And so I was, removing those things to kind of tamp down my symptoms, but it was very important for me to just have a mind towards my blood sugar and the nutrient quality of my meal, and still be eating a lot of different vegetables. So I really focused on a lot of leafy greens and carrots, like certain types of vegetables that were on the okay list. And then I also really focus on cooking them. I think that can be a real game changer for people. There are a lot of times that we feel that an ingredient irritates us, but it could just be because we're preparing it the wrong way. So if your gut is, on the weaker side, and you feel like certain types of fiber, certain types of vegetables don't agree with you, I would highly recommend trying it in a pureed soup and then reporting back. And,
Yes.
If you're worried about it, that could be a good entry point for you.
Cool. Yeah, good. And what about fermented veggies?
Yeah. So that's kind of a no-no for SIBO as well. Kind of another halo effect is it can affect your histamine tolerance, which is something that, again, is not really talked about that much in mainstream health or wellness world. But histamines are incredibly important element of kind of our immune system and many, many functions of the body. And bacteria kind of carry their own histamine count. Certain foods carry their own histamine, and histamine kind of develops the most in foods that are aged or fermented or kept around for a while. So like anything canned or tinned, and then anything that's actively fermented. So it's not the best choice for people with SIBO. Probiotics in general are often not the best choice for SIBO if they're just regular over the counter. There are certain types of probiotics that are used in SIBO treatment, but you want to work with a practitioner who's fairly savvy on those things. So yeah, I think fermented foods are great kind of during the reintroduction and the healing phase. And, things like fermented, like kraut juice, that are really easy, don't involve any roughage, can be a good kind of entry point. But yeah, just loading yourself up with fermented foods if your gut's in a certain place is not necessarily the first step.
And it's good for me to hear, and for the listeners to hear you say that it's not a one size fits all thing. Fiber is not the be all and end all for everybody, and fermented foods are not the magic answer for people who have digestive problems. It's great that you're sending the message that it's not a one size fits all
Totally.
solution.
And I was eating all of those things in the fall of 2017, and it was just making me miserable. But I was just like, oh gosh, my gut's a mess. Like I got to eat more kraut. I got to eat more, I got to drink more kombucha. I got to take more probiotics. And it just was not agreeing with me. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying these things. It's a pretty easy entry point, and you're not going to be doing, too much damage. But if you're not reacting well after a week or two, after you've kind of gotten over the initial hump of what could be like an acclimation period, definitely stop. Don't just, do it because you read that it was good for you. You might have a different type of issue.
Yeah, that's very, very wise. Yes. Yeah. See how you feel. Because as we said, it's not the same treatment, as it were. If food, we can call food treatment, for everybody. And so when you have SIBO, do you have it for life or can it be reversed?
No, it's just literally an overgrowth. So once you get rid of the overgrowth, you're done. Really, there are a lot of people that said who have chronic SIBO, and that's because potentially one of your underlying causes cannot be addressed, was never addressed, or can't be addressed. Sometimes you have an underlying cause that is structural and can't really be avoided. But there are 40 plus different underlying causes for SIBO, Hashimoto's being one of them. I wouldn't say that's, solely the contributor, but things like stress can cause SIBO. And I think for me, combination of Hashimoto's plus stress was kind of what set me over the edge. And then food poisoning is a really popular one for people, a really common one. So, a lot of the time with that, it's not necessarily chronic. You just can kind of get over the hump. It's just like an aftermath of what happens when you have an issue in the gut that sets off a chain reaction that damages the way that your small intestines functions.
Yeah, my gosh. And so if you had some advice for regular people, or irregular in my case when it came to going to the bathroom, whether or not, how do we know if we have SIBO or not?
Well, there's a test. It's a breath test. So strange system for most people, but essentially you kind of drink a sugar solution and then breathe into a series of tubes, and they measure the gas in your breath, which is only present, from bacteria. It's not like we produce these gases ourselves normally. And that can kind of tell you, depending on the timing, where in your intestines those bacteria might be present. If it, reaches the large intestine, kind of like the third out of the test, that's completely normal. It's where your bacteria is supposed to be. So you should be experiencing those gases. But if it's too soon, then it's an indication potentially of an overgrowth.
Okay. All right. And would you say that, what we're talking about is not a one size fits all thing, but that probably cutting sugar and gluten are going to do more for you than against you?
Yeah, absolutely. And gluten did a lot for me over time. That's kind of the thing that I'm strictest about. I wouldn't say like everyone who has SIBO necessarily needs to go gluten-free, but gluten containing grains is definitely one of the major things in the FODMAP acronym. So if you're doing a low FODMAP diet, you would try removing those things, though it's not a totally gluten-free approach. And then sugar, yeah, absolutely. I think during any time of healing, especially acute gut issue, be it in the large intestines or small intestines, removing sugar could definitely help you.
Yeah. And not just added sugar or refined sugar, you were saying, also, like I would venture to say that pureeing or liquidizing your fruit is probably the sugar in the fruit in the liquidized form is probably going to hit your body faster for the sugars than just eating the whole fruit.
Yes, definitely.
And people think it doesn't take much time to make a smoothie in the morning, but it takes even less time just to eat the fruit.
It's true.
And you don't have anything to wash afterwards,
Yeah, for sure.
I think chewing is highly underrated in our society.
Yes, absolutely. And that would be a big thing I would recommend for anyone with SIBO. Just chew your food better.
Yeah. So now you have a book called SIBO Made Simple, is that right?
Yes.
So what gave you the idea of actually, because you wouldn't think there's enough about SIBO to fill a book, but there is.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's the problem. If there was, enough concrete information about SIBO, you wouldn't need to write a whole book about it. It would just be a simple plan. And there are, not to hate on other SIBO books, there are other SIBO books out there that, claim a 21-day plan, but it's just, there's truly no one size fits all solution for SIBO. I mean, it's really complicated. Everyone has different underlying causes. Everyone's going to have kind of a different makeup of bacteria that are overgrowing. I mean, if you think about it, our large intestinal microbiome is more unique than a fingerprint. Like that, of course, is going to apply further up with any sort of overgrowth, even if it's kind of dominated by one type of pathogen. So yeah, the solution is very different for everyone. There is no official SIBO diet that's been data backed. There are a lot of different approaches, including low FODMAP, which is the most popular that I mentioned. But again, there are a lot of different herbs and also prescription antibiotics that are used. And then there are a lot of different lifestyle changes that you can make, like chewing. For one example, that, might help you after the fact ensure that it doesn't come back. So it's very complicated. There are a lot of facets to it. If you want a little introduction, I also have a podcast called SIBO Made Simple, which was kind of the impetus for the book, because it was supposed to be just a simple 12 episode, one season podcast. And then 50 episodes later, I realized, oh my goodness, there's a lot of information here. I need to write a book.
Yes. And do you have recipes in your book?
Yes. It's like 50-50 recipes and information. So there are over 90 recipes in the book.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And they're really delicious, even if you don't have SIBO, I have to say.
Yes.
I still make a lot of them.
Right. I mean, I would totally make them, and I don't think I have SIBO, in fact, I don't have the symptoms of it, but I know people in my family who do and are in denial about it, but let's not go there.
Totally.
And so you've got you have a blog as well?
I do. That's just feedmephoebe.com. And that's where you can kind of find the podcast and a lot of free recipes on there. And then the kind of low FODMAP SIBO friendly recipes are all in the book, SIBO Made Simple.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put those links below along with the episode. And thank you so much for opening up this world. I didn't know anything about SIBO.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk about.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. What an interesting, fascinating subject that Phoebe demystifies. And I have a soft spot for anything to do with gut health and general digestion because I suffered for so many years. And for the longest time, I was given a one-size-fits-all solution, in other words, to eat more fiber. And for me, that made my digestive issues worse. So I'm always happy to meet experts who think outside the box, like Phoebe does, and who are willing to really get to the bottom of IBS symptoms. Ha ha, no pun intended. And even though, as we said, we're all different, what seems to be a common denominator for people with gut issues seems to be, well, cutting sugar, amongst other things. So if you're curious about how to make sure that you choose the right foods for you, check out Phoebe's book, SIBO Made Simple. And you can also check out the free resources that I have on my website, aftersugarclub.com. Click on the orange Learn More button to go to my FAQ page where there's answers to all types of questions to do with sugar, real foods, fermented foods, and intermittent fasting. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the orange button, Learn More. You can also grab my list of top 10 books about sugar, intermittent fasting, and gut health because, knowledge is power. And I don't want you to spend the hundreds of hours that I spent reading through dozens of books. So that's why I want to give you my list of top 10 books. And even if you only read one or two of them, it'll make a huge difference in how you see sugar, intermittent fasting, and gut health. And you can download that list at aftersugarclub.com and click on the orange Learn More button. And if you're an intermittent faster, then I have 5 tips for you to help get rid of cravings that may be getting in the way of the easy and natural intermittent fasting lifestyle that you're looking for. You'll find those at aftersugarclub.com. You can also find lots of free resources on the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, on the Life After Sugar Facebook page, and come and subscribe to my Instagram, which is at My Life After Sugar, where I post pictures of what I eat, what I do, and sometimes pictures of our cat, so that you can see that it is totally possible to live an active, happy, and fun life, even if you don't eat sugar. And for a deeper dive into your relationship with sugar and how you can work towards freeing yourself from the hold that sugar has on you, so that you can get to that place of joyful freedom from sugar that I've been living for almost 7 years, and experience what it feels like not to want, need, or even miss sugar anymore, then the After Sugar Club is for you. Check it out at aftersugarclub.com. And if this podcast is inspiring you to take one more step towards your life after sugar, then could I ask you to please scroll down and leave the podcast a lovely 5-star rating and leave a short review to let me know how this podcast is inspiring you to break free from sugar your way and find the real sweetness in life. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.